All right, we're here. So I've tried to bite my tongue for a very long time on this situation. As you guys are fans of the channel, you know Diego Sanchez is one of the UFC fighters that I've known for a very long time. We go back a really long time, actually. And you know, his life has kind of been in a crisis over the last few years. It's really crescendoed and it's peaked in the last week or so. You know, finishing up with him being cut from the UFC, and then subsequently after that breaking up with his manager, coach, Joshua Fabia. And, you know, this entire time I've tried to not be judgmental, tried to not lash out, because when people are in these kind of situations, they're very vulnerable. And everybody that tried to reach out and stop and step in and have concern for Diego was pushed away. And that's typically what happens in these kind of situations where there's a weird power dynamic, a toxic relationship, if you will, whether they're professional or personal. So any of you guys that have known somebody that's had a toxic relationship, an abusive boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever, they have that kind of influence. It could be a boss that when people try to step in for their safety, whether it's family members, friends, anybody like that, what happens is that person then turns that person against those people and basically says, hey, they're trying to separate us, they want to move us apart, they don't have your best interest in mind. And in my opinion, I think that's what's pretty much happened this entire last 2 years. And because of that, I haven't spoken out or said anything about Diego, because I wanted to give him a door or an avenue that if he needed to reach out to me, he didn't feel like I was trying to get in there and separate them, and he felt like I could be somebody that he could trust and wouldn't be judging him on his you know, professional relationship with his coach and manager, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So obviously Joshua has been the butt of a lot of internet jokes, and I'm not here to talk about any of that. And I'm not here to judge his professional skills when it comes to MMA training or fighting. Obviously, I'm no expert in that field. The experts have spoken, in my opinion. So the coaches and the fighters that have spoken up on technique have spoken. The results sort of speak for themselves as well. What I'm going to talk about is where we've crossed the line. And the reason why I'm making this video today is because we've gone past that line. And now we have somebody out there that is basically trying to damage Diego's name retroactively just because things haven't gone his way. And that's what Joshua has done. So, you know, he did a podcast literally the day after Diego Sanchez came out through his lawyer, and he said, I've terminated my professional relationship with Joshua Fabia. But also, if you keep reading the article, he says, I'm not going to disparage Joshua. He believes Joshua's done a lot for him. He's been there in troubled times, and I don't doubt any of that, right? You know, the friendship, whatever, I haven't been privy to it. But after that article came out, Joshua took the first opportunity to go on a podcast, behind the scenes, with Summer Helene, I believe is her name. And I sat there and listened to it on Friday. Literally one day after Diego ended the professional relationship, he had to go on a podcast and disparage Diego. And that's why I'm making this video, because now it's gone past that point to me. You know, Joshua went on there, he disparaged Bernadette Sanchez, who is Diego's ex-wife, who was a great person. He went on there and disparaged Diego. He's already disparaged many of my friends, including the coaches at Jackson Wink, unnecessarily. You know, the greatest fighting coaches in the history of the planet with all of these world title championships somehow don't know how to coach anymore. And I took some of that personally as well, obviously. You know, he went on there and claimed Diego was an addict, addicted to kratom and alcohol, both of which are legal. He took shots at him saying he was special needs. Yeah, Diego's a UFC fighter. He's not a Rhodes Scholar, but he's a smart enough guy. Like, do I think he's vulnerable to certain types of belief systems? Obviously, that's true, right? But he's not a dunce. He can understand some complex, you know, terminology and complex systems, and obviously he's been able to learn through his professional career and be a successful, you know, fighter who's been able to fight forever. So these shots at his intelligence are, you know, the way he was making it sound was that this person wasn't capable of having rational thoughts or conversations, which isn't true, you know, and even if he was in, you know, whatever classes in high school that he was, that doesn't mean that he can't function in the real world. In fact, as far as I know, he has dyslexia, and that's probably what they were referring to when he was judging Diego for being special needs. So just because you can't read well doesn't mean that you're not a smart enough person to function in society, and that's, you know, obvious, you know, taking the shots at Bernadette and publishing emails from Bernadette, private emails that went from Bernadette to the UFC about Diego's health. Joshua felt the need to screen cap those. He sent them to me in my DMs. In my opinion, I don't know this, I haven't spoken to Diego in maybe a year and a half or so, but in my opinion, Diego Sanchez's Instagram account blocked me. It also blocked Chad Smith, his wrestling coach, who's been there and done so much for Diego. It blocked Jackson Wink. It blocked Derek Montoya, my barber at 3D Cuts. So if you guys are ever in town, make sure you go get clipped up by Derek Montoya. All these people that have been there for Diego for a long time, it caused Diego to separate from his high school buddies, Anthony, Nick, Joe, all these guys that have been to so many fights with Diego and been there for him. He separated from all of those people and apparently was having problems with his family and separating from them as well, all as a consequence to the controversy, related to the relationship with Joshua. So it is by definition a toxic relationship. When you push everybody away from you, Greg Jackson, Mike Winklejohn, Brandon Gibson, Coach Bart Lujan, Chad Smith, these guys really love and care about Diego and have gone through a lot for and with Diego. And to have them all be pushed away for one individual, I mean, that by definition is toxic. Same with Derek. Derek and Diego have been best friends for 13, 14 years. And all of a sudden, Diego's blocking Derek on Instagram and not talking to him anymore. Is that him or is that somebody else? But Joshua was still following me from his accounts, which, I didn't block him because, again, I didn't want to judge him or judge his skill set or any of those other kind of things because I wanted Diego to feel like if he needed to talk to somebody, he had an open door to come back and talk to me. So we'll circle back around. So I've known Diego in passing since high school. He went to Del Norte High School. I went to La Cueva High School, both here in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He's 2 years older than me, I believe. So we wrestled in the same brackets. We never wrestled against each other. So we both had wrestled another great wrestler from Santa Fe named Henry Martinez in freestyle back in the day. So we were a little closer in weight back then. And then, I went and played football in college and went to grad school. And Diego ended up going to the UFC and really put Albuquerque on the map with The Ultimate Fighter. Then I met Diego, really met him through a friend named Toby when I moved back to New Mexico in 2011. And then Derek Montoya, who's the barber we were just talking about, I'd been working on him. I get my hair cut there. He brought Diego into the office in 2012, 13 roughly. From there, Diego actually introduced me to most of the Jackson Wink people. He introduced me to Julie Kedzie, Cowboy Cerrone. He brought Cowboy in 2012, 13. He brought, Greg Jackson. He brought Jody Escobar, Andre Arlovsky, Alistair Overeem, Tim Kennedy, Cub Swanson, Isaac Valley Flag, Kyle Noak, Frank Mir. I mean, so many fighters that really opened up as an avenue for our business and for partnerships are really as a result of Diego Sanchez. So, we wouldn't be with Jackson Wink, which has been a really great partnership. We've been partnered with Jackson Wink for 8 years now, so we're in-house at Jackson Wink if it wasn't for Diego. And that's why it was also heartbreaking that, when Diego left the gym, he had a lot of negative things to say in the media, and it just wasn't necessary. And I could tell those thoughts were being placed there and manipulated from somewhere else, which is ironic because they're always talking about other people manipulating things here and there. And again, these paranoid ideas that, Joshua Fabia was talking about Instagram. Instagram was hiring bots to leave negative comments. Dude, Instagram doesn't care about any of us. None of our accounts are growing. We're so low on the totem pole when it comes to that. There's so many people with tens of millions of followers. There's nobody at Instagram that wants to lean or flex on Diego or any of these other people. I mean, that is delusions of grandeur from Joshua. And he was talking about Diego needs to seek professional mental help. I think that same thing goes for Joshua after listening to all of his interviews. I don't think he's nearly as smart as he thinks he is. He can't finish his sentences. He doesn't know where he's going with any of the ideas. And then he leads people. He goes, oh, so you see what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? When there was no point made whatsoever. We had already had some red flags go up. So let me backtrack again. So I've worked 10 or 11 camps with Diego over the years. I traveled to fights with him. I would help him cut weight. Spent time with his family, spent time with his father and Bernadette, who's a loving, great wife. She cares about him deeply still to this day. You can go to her Instagram page. She wrote a really loving response to this entire situation, and she begged him and tried to make it work too. They have a daughter together, a beautiful girl named Deja, and somehow that all got caught up in all of this as well. So I traveled to a bunch of fights, and then again, by the way, all out of love, and obviously there was some help for me too. Like I said, Diego introduced me to people, and I enjoyed helping somebody from Albuquerque and a UFC fighter get ready for fights. I mean, it was fun for me too, but I never took $1 from Diego. He just never paid me a single dollar, so I paid my own way to go to all these things, and I would never ask him to either because I was doing it out of a friendship way, which I think is more than you can be said for the current situation. I watched him go through coaches. I watched him, deal with situations and ups and downs and wins and losses. And, I was there at the Gilbert Melendez fight in the hotel room, with Nick and Joe and all these folks, after Diego had that crazy war at UFC 166 in Houston, and, his head was swollen. And, I think Bernadette had told a story about how he was trying to see out of his eye to see his daughter. And, I was here when he won his fight against Ross Pearson. It was controversial, but he won the fight in Albuquerque in 2014 as well. And so I've been with him for a long time. I know Diego really well. He's got a heart of gold, but he can be susceptible to people that get in his ears. And this just is the perfect situation where you had somebody that, in my opinion, he has these delusions of grandeur, Joshua, if you listen to everything he says, but hasn't actually put in the work to be the things he wants to be. One of the first red flags when he first started working with him, because Chad Smith, is somebody who worked with me, he's a wrestling coach. This is before the Mickey Golf fight, and he said, "Hey, this guy's over here, burning stuff," and kind of weirded out, but that's what Diego wanted, and he won the fight. So I went and looked at his website, and there was a lot of red flags already. It said he fell into the role of physical therapist as a child, and he rehabbed his grandfather to 95% capacity from a stroke. Well, first of all, you don't fall into a physical therapist role. Physical therapist is a licensed and regulated profession. People go to school for 7 or 8 years to become physical therapists in the United States. So you have to have an undergraduate degree. You have to have a doctorate degree now as well. You don't get to just call yourself a physical therapist. You have to be licensed. It's regulated. You can't say you're the massage therapist, the fight coach, the nutritionist. Those are also regulated professions that require education. To be a nutritionist, an RD, you have to have a degree in dietetics or nutrition. So you actually have to have some formal education to be able to do that. And that's for good reason, by the way. Same could be said with massage therapists. In New Mexico, massage therapist is a licensed and regulated profession. So you have to be licensed by the board. You can't just go around and massage people or call yourself a massage therapist, which is what his website was saying. It also said he was certified in things like human rights and certified in military fields, which obviously none of those things are real. You can't be certified in military fields or certified in human rights. So just from that context itself, before I ever talked to the guy, I had really, suspicious thoughts on what was happening. And then next thing you know, he's in the gym working with Diego. Again, no big deal. Like, I'm not here to judge the training methods, not what I would do. Again, as a strength conditioning person, I have a master's in exercise science. I have a bachelor's degree in biology. I have 2 doctorate degrees, one in naturopathic medicine and chiropractic medicine. I have a bachelor's degree in human anatomy. I have a bachelor's degree in health and wellness. I'm a certified strength conditioning specialist through the NSCA. I'm a functional movement screen specialist. So I know strength conditioning pretty darn well. So I'm not thrilled with it, but hey, whatever. The movement thing was the trend, right? We had Ido Portal, we had all these people doing movement stuff. Carlos Condit had the MoveNat. It seemed like something people were into, and it didn't seem to be taking away. But as far as I know, what happened next was there was a conflict between Coach Winklejohn and Joshua Fabia, where Joshua thought his Sistema moves would stop kickboxing. You have to remember, Coach Winklejohn is a world champion kickboxer from the 90s. I mean, he's credentialed. He's a real fighter. And as far as what was told to me was Winklejohn challenged him, and the Sistema stuff didn't hold up very well, and it was apparently embarrassing for Joshua. And next thing you know, the next day, Diego left the gym. He fired all the coaches, fired Chad, who's been with him through thick and thin, traveled everywhere with him, done so much for Diego. He fired Winklejohn and Greg, and by the way, they let him come back after he left previously too. So, if people really wanted to be stubborn, they could keep people out of the gym. But all of us have always had a big open heart for Diego. So he left, and again, for me, wanting to keep that bridge and that door open, I never came out and said anything negative about them or anything else, but I could see manipulation happening in real time. So fast forward, so that goes on for a while. He does the weird interviews before the Michael Chiesa fight, and then he loses the fight, in my opinion. Again, not doing any strength conditioning, but fighting up a weight class at 170, there was a big strength difference, and that was probably the biggest issue in that fight, because you can't just do movements and stretch for a professional athlete. You need to do weightlifting and speed and strength conditioning and live wrestle, and I didn't see any of that. From there, he had another fight where he got booked with Michael Pereira. So that was the last time I actually spoke with Diego, and the day of the fight, he starts hitting me up, we have floor seats. It's here in Albuquerque, right? So I'm like, oh man, Diego must be hurt. He's like, hey, you're going to be there early. I'm like, yeah, man, what do you need from me? And he was really concerned that I needed to adjust Joshua's neck. So that entire day, he was blowing me up, texting me, because apparently Joshua needed to get his neck adjusted. And even 15 minutes before the fight, Diego was still texting Derek, who I was sitting with, that, we needed to adjust Joshua. Again, no problem. I've met Joshua twice. He was a really nice guy. I didn't have any personal issue with him. I'm not here to crap on him as a person or whatever, but the lines were crossed in this interview when you're releasing people's personal information to try to make Diego look bad, who is my friend. Whether he got cut or not, that doesn't have anything to do with me. Diego's 39 and he was coming to the end of his career anyway. So anyway, that day, Joshua comes out. He's the only corner man for Diego again. Remember, we don't see this very often in MMA. You need 3 or 4 corner people, typically speaking, because there's expertise. You need jiu-jitsu, wrestling, striking, and maybe a head coach. And Joshua was doing all that, plus carrying the bucket, plus doing the water, because they didn't want anybody else involved, obviously. But literally 15 minutes before the fight, I'm, adjusting Joshua's neck, when he should be focused on Diego. And again, I'm glad to help. I want to help any way I can. But that was another red flag, that this was all about Joshua and not about Diego. So that was a really weird thing. And again, that's the last time I personally spoke with Diego, because he obviously isn't going to go to, Jackson Wink. And I even offered, I was like, hey, if you need work, we have another location here in town. Even though people might not like it, my loyalty is you were with me before anybody else. And I just hadn't heard from him for a very long time. And then the next thing I knew, it was the same thing. He'd cut off all of his best friends. He'd cut off all the coaches that were loyal to him. And then we see the media stuff start happening, where they're beefing with Joe Rogan, they're beefing with Ariel Helwani, they're beefing with Michael Bisping, they're beefing with Paul Felder and Megan O'Leary. And, all of these people have something negative to say. And they have a whole bunch of negative stuff to say back. They didn't like the broadcasting. He had a problem with what Daniel Cormier said about the spitting thing he was doing here in Albuquerque, which was apparently a matador, not a chicken. And then they posted, a bunch of interesting videos. Again, fight-wise, I'm not interested in that technique. I'm just interested in the relationships and the behavior. And it obviously was getting toxic. All of us were sitting back like, man, I don't know about this. Again, none of us spoke out about it. You never heard Greg Jackson or Brandon Gibson or Chad Smith or Bart Lujan or any of these people who have been there for Diego for a long time go out and say anything in public, because we know how this goes. If we say that, then Diego's going to turn around because he's going to have the thing in the ear and they're just going to start attacking us too. And then there won't be a safe place for anybody for him to talk to. So a lot of people had expected me to say something before this, because, a lot of people have come out and said stuff. Chris Brown, John Jones, Luis Baboon back in Miami, Hector Lombard. All these people have tried to reach out to Diego, but he shunned them all because, you're in the grips and it ends up us against the world kind of mentality. And that's what people do when they're in those toxic relationships. So again, I didn't speak up before, and maybe I should have, but probably not, because nobody else was able to make a dent either. So I guess it didn't really matter in the end. But again, when I was listening to that podcast, this person, one day after a professional break, he's out there airing private emails. He's out there accusing people of being addicts and being, slow and all these other things. That's not what you do to somebody you care about. So the fact that in one day he was able to turn around and stab Diego in the back and try to put all his personal information out and make accusations about Diego's performance in high school tells you a lot about this individual's character. And to me, that's when it's gone too far. When you're talking about Bernadette, when you're talking about, Diego's personal character, it's gone too far, and I've had enough of it. Obviously there's been confrontations. He kind of got worked over at the bar at Twin Peaks, as Lando Venata and Cowboy Cerrone were talking about. There were some other issues. Frank Lester confronted him. So all of these people, that a lot of them don't even like each other, all basically had the exact same opinion of this individual. And it seems that there's a character issue where he pushes and then people are like, I don't know, and then they become the enemy, and then he tells Diego they're the enemy. And so basically at this point, it's just those two against the world. And what really bothers me the most about the entire thing is Diego, sold everybody out for Joshua, essentially. His wife, his parents, his best friends from high school, everybody for Joshua. And the moment things went a little bit sideways, the first thing Joshua did was take to a podcast to despair and demean Diego, claim that he left Diego, claim that Diego took advantage of him, when we know that we've seen this OnlyFans with the winky faces and all these pictures where I don't know if Diego knows what's going on or not, but in the podcast, they talk about this, and I'll link it below so you guys can go listen to the behind the scenes podcast. But I basically became infuriated. I was already really upset when I saw the video of him hanging upside down and this guy punching him in the face and kicking him. We're not doing body hardening on the brain. We've all had micro traumas on our brain. I played football. These guys have fought. But I think Diego's taken the most strikes in the history of the UFC. The last thing this guy needs is to be getting hit in the head when he's not in a fight. And then, push come to shove as the end happened, where they were asking for medical records. By the way, the commission has the medical records, and most medical licensing boards only need to carry 7 years worth of medical records. So they're not going to have medical records going all the way back to 2005. That doesn't exist. The UFC doesn't have them. The commission likely doesn't have them. Most boards can allow you to destroy your records after 7 to 10 years. Depends state to state. But this idea that he wasn't going to fight unless they got their medical records, and then wherever that advice came for them to not answer Hunter Campbell, to me, they robbed Diego of his retirement fight. And the UFC really has, in a lot of ways, the UFC does wrong, right? They don't pay their fighters enough. Their contracts are very not fair for what the market is. But in a lot of ways, they did Diego right. They were giving him fights. They were paying him extra. And in this case, when they cut him, they gave him his entire fight purse, his fight bonus, and the Reebok money. And then also, this entire situation put Cowboy Cerrone in a terrible spot. He was there for a week early. They were supposed to fight each other. Two legends fighting it out. They're going to leave the gloves in the cage. So Diego, a Hall of Famer, and Cowboy likely a future Hall of Famer, could have had it out, and Diego could have left his gloves in the cage. It would have had a montage. It would have been a beautiful moment. He got robbed of that because of this situation, because of ego, right? This thing was all about ego. Ego. Me. Look at me. Everybody's doing me wrong. The entire media is after me. Diego, look out. They're after us. They want to disparage me. It's ego. And you saw that the day after they broke up by the disparagement, because it's always about this individual. Always. I've been watching for 2 years, keeping my mouth shut, just building up inside. But here we are. And then Cowboy Cerrone took a fight with the 170er, and Cowboy's not going to say no. And then he ends up losing and not getting his win money. So everybody got screwed in that situation. Except for, Diego got his money, and whatever percentage of purse, Joshua obviously got paid a decent amount as well. Again, more than I've ever gotten paid. I guarantee you he got paid more than Chad Smith or Bart Lujan, who coached him all those years, ever got paid as well. With no wins either. So really, we've come down to it. And at this point, like I said, the tolerance for the Joshua Fabia, it's gone at this point. Listen, man, you're not from New Mexico. You're from Oregon or wherever you're from. You're coming in here talking about our public schools and saying that people that are special ed just get shoved through. Listen, our state has a lot of problems. We don't need you to come in and tell us what's wrong with it. Listen, we're all from here. We're all native New Mexicans, and we're going to stand up for each other. So I'm going to reach out to Diego. Obviously, you don't have his back. You're willing to go out there and disparage him on a podcast, go after him, release public information, go after his wife, Bernadette, who's an amazing person. And we're done with it, man. So I hope you never work with another fighter ever again. And really, I can't fathom anybody ever serves up for your school again. You were obsessed with all these interviews. Tell them about School of Self-Awareness. Tell them about this and that. You grab Diego by the hand. You don't let him talk, repeatedly as you talk over everybody. And the thing is listen, before I was ever on Instagram or YouTube or any of these social media platforms ever existed, I had full practices in Dallas and Cincinnati and Albuquerque. Do you know why? Because if you do a good job and your service is great, people refer more people to you. Your work speaks for itself. You don't need to get on podcasts. You don't need to get on the internet. You don't need to make these crazy ideas that the UFC is trying to off you or kill you or that all these commentators have it out for you. You don't need to do that to get clientele. Your work will speak for itself. Nobody needs to go watch your videos. Before I ever had a video on YouTube at all, I had full practices. You know why? Because I did right by people, I took care of people, and they referred more people to me. I've been booked full for over a decade. Now, of course, because I'm a YouTuber and because we have social media platforms, yes, that does help us drive business, but that's not the starting point. The starting point is doing right by people, having abundance, treating people like you would want them to be treated, like you would want somebody to treat your mother, not overcharging, not overpromising, taking care of people. And you know what? Your business will do a lot better. But when you try to piggyback off somebody else's fame and you try to make it seem like everybody's out to get you, I can't fathom that's a financially beneficial business model that's going to drive your school of self-awareness ever in the future. So, you sort of made your own bet as far as business goes with this. The last man you had standing was Diego, and at the first sign, you cut bait and turned on him and made it seem like you were the victim of Diego. You were the victim of Diego? That's insane. This man stood up for you at every single turn. Loyalty to the T, against his family, against his ex-wife, you know, not seeing his daughter, against his good friends that he's known for over a decade, because you needed to have him as your ally to promote yourself, because it always has to be about you. And I'm done with it. So I blocked him, obviously. I'm just done with it. And hopefully Diego, once he sees that podcast and sees this man disparaging him, and Diego's a good man. He's got a good heart. He's a great father. You know, he's had great business relationships. He cares about that. He cares about Albuquerque. He cares about the kids. To be out there disparaging him and taking his personal information, that, by the way, I don't even think is true, and taking it the first chance you get and throwing it on a podcast says a lot more about him than it does about you than it does about him. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the Diego Sanchez, Joshua Fabia stuff. You know, it's really spiraled out of control. It's really sad to see his career come to an end. I really hope that Dana White, you know, and Diego can work something out to where he can, you know, maybe re-sign for one fight so he can get that moment that he deserves, that Hall of Fame moment where they can have a montage. He can leave his gloves there in the octagon and he can go out with the legend he wants to do. But really, this whole thing was a shame. And yes, I'm sure it was very entertaining for everybody out there to watch these interviews, you know, watch him be combative with Luke Thomas, who, by the way, did an amazing job of being professional in the interview. Joshua slapped John Morgan on the interview. I saw him slap that guy. You know, the standing behind the schmo in the interview and getting in his personal space, you know, calling John Anik and all these other people names. I mean, the lack of the lack of professionalism, the attacking Megan O'Leary, who is as professional as they get. So shout out to Megan O'Leary, John Anik, and Paul Felder. They handled that as well as anybody possibly could. For somebody to come in there and just disrespect them in their own space like that, and making it about them instead of making it about Diego, which is exactly what Megan O'Leary said. So yeah, it turns out I support what every single one of those other people said. You know, my only interest is in Diego's welfare and future. So, you know, we'll see what we can do. You know, we have big social media platforms. You know, maybe we could figure, I don't know what his finances are. You know, according to Josh, he doesn't have any money. I think Diego's probably doing well. He's got branding stuff. He's got shirts. So I'll stick the link for Diego's merchandise in the link below as well. He's also got a rum out apparently. Not sure how much Joshua owns that as well. But, you know, let's try to figure out a way if he doesn't get that fight and if he does need the financial help, that we, the fans, you know, can help Diego out here, because he, in my opinion, I think that this whole situation, he was the victim. You know, should he have seen it coming? I guess. You know, I don't know. You know, and the other thing was Diego was about as devout a Christian as I've ever known in my life. And during the last year and a half, all of a sudden, he just threw that away. You know, he threw away his marriage, he threw away his gym relationships, and there's only one common denominator with every single one of those, and that is the ego of Joshua Fabia, who calls himself a physical therapist, a nutritionist, a striking coach, a wrestling coach, movement coach, and everything else under the sun with no credentials for any of those things. And he says, oh, well, the Western world, you need pieces of paper, you kill trees. But there's a reason why we have that. It's for public safety and it's for expertise, right? Like, I'm licensed by the medical board and the chiropractor board, and the reason why is for public safety. That you have done at least 8 years of university, that you're passing boards, that you're continuing and doing 30 hours of CEUs to keep you up to date on the literature so you know what's right and what isn't for your patients. You don't get to just shortcut that stuff because you're confident. So anyway, that's the end of my rant. But yeah, I had to break the ice here. You know, I finally had to speak out. That was the last straw for me. It pissed me off. And, you know, Diego, I apologize if I didn't come to you earlier. I don't think you would have believed me. Obviously, you didn't believe anybody else. And man, I hope we can link up in the future, and you know, just in a friendship, brother way like we used to. And yeah, man, well, whatever help you need, we got you, man. If we need to take care of your body, if we can, you know, find other avenues to support you, whether it's through merchandise or whatever else, Diego, just know we got your back, man. And we're not going to sit here idly and let these people try to trash your reputation, especially the person that you were loyal to and you put all your trust in. So anyway, go to Diego's IG, tell him how you guys feel about it. Obviously you have. He's going to think you're bots. Comment below, tell me what you guys think. What are your thoughts on Joshua Fabia? And yeah, we'll get some cracking videos up next time. But thanks for tuning in, guys.